They remained in service right until the early 1950s. However, the design was such a proven design, even though it was an antiquated design. When the company was about to lose its franchise in the 1920s, the government had to legislate about building new tram cars to cater for the needs of Brisbane. And the company, rather than invest in new technology and new tram cars that it wasn't going to be remaining in control of for the next couple of years anyway, they opted to build cars of an outdated class. So more of these cars were built in 1921. Also a few extra dreadnoughts were built to bolster the numbers. This tram is in writing in now is one of those ones that was built in 1921. Even though 47 and it are contemporaries, there's 20 years apart. Colloquially, they were known as toast tracks. People remember the old wood stove. People used to cook the toast on the griddle, and everyone knew that if you put the piece of toast on a plate, the bottom one was soggy and the top one became really dry as toast. Anyway, they came up with this idea of toast tracks where they stood the piece of, or the slice of toast vertically, so that when the person required a bit of bread, a bit of toast, they just took it from the rack and butter and ate it. So I guess someone one day said, hey, that tram looks like a toast track, so the name was stuck. The more colloquial term that Brisbane gave them was called jumping jacks, and the reason this was, the axles are here. The end of the tram's out there. These trams are very popular on the Gregory Terrace line. And as these trams went along, they got a natural undulating effect. But all the kids from the high school, when you got 10 kids standing on the back platform jumping up and down, it was good enough to derail the tram.
Oh, really?
So the term jumping jack was applied to them, and that sort of stuck for a long time amongst the crews and whatever. 65 has had a lot of colourful life too. It was in service, as you see it, for most of its life. When it was withdrawn from traffic in the early 50s, it was stored down at one of the depots, and got a bit knocked around. But in 1959, the splitting up of Queensland and or the breaking of Queensland off from New South Wales, they had a cavalcade of transport, and virtually every mode of transport with wheels on it was included in that procession. And they had a number of trams featured in that procession. The 65 was one of them. Now this type of tram had sort of left the streets for quite a number of years. So the people living in Brisbane in the late 50s weren't sort of, they could remember these, but they weren't sort of used to it. And the younger kids thought it was a real buzz. So being so popular, or being seen in the cavalcade of transport, back in the day you could hire trams for a day.
Oh wow.
And I think for worked out to about £4. Yeah, about £4 for 5 hours you could hire a tram. And this tram was very popular after being seen in the procession. So, as Peter points out, this tram had better life in retirement than what it did. It used to party on more in retirement than what it did during its running life. Anyone got any questions at all?
How many years were they in use? Sorry.
I'm sorry?
How many years were they used? Sorry.
They were built in 1907, or this one was built in 1921, but between 1907 and 1921, but they were withdrawn from service in the early 50s. And this one, after the cavalcade of transport, it was earmarked for preservation. So they had a number of trams. They wanted to preserve trams as early as 1951, and one of the tram expatriates that we knew, he approached the City Council for them to preserve a combination car. And back in 1951, there was a lot of newer trams being built, and the trams, there's actually trams in existence. They were actually parked on the tarmacs outside depots. There wasn't enough depot space to house all the trams. So the word was given to him, no, we can't afford to provide a space for a tram that's not earning us revenue. So the offer was declined. They also tried to preserve an old brill, one of the old trams that was imported from America. But that too returned the same answer. They couldn't store a tram that wasn't earning revenue in the depot space when the depot space was required for revenue in. So it wasn't really until 1959 that the preservation of the tram cars actually took off. And the ones that you're riding in today are the trams that had been earmarked from that era on. Any more questions?
So where was it eventually stored?
It was in Paddington, would you believe?
Oh, no,
Wow.
it survived the fire.
Fire,
About a
yeah.
month before it was moved over to Bushwick Road. All the preserved cars were 99. They were all preserved in Paddington. So
What's your opinion about the fire? Do you think it was deliberate?
Yeah, was it deliberate?
Hard to say. Clinton
there's
Jones?
that many conspiracy theories out there. For my personal way of thinking, there were so many things that went wrong on that night. I don't think anyone could have sat down and orchestrated the script for it. Things like they lost water pressure, the doors on the fire stations jammed shut, the fire engines got caught in traffic at Petrie Terrace, at Normanby. The power was switched off while they were trying to get trams out. Things like that.
Poor management,
people
yeah.
just couldn't sit down and orchestrate that. So I think a wise man once said to me, if you can't decide between a conspiracy and a stuff-up, go the stuff-up every time. So I think it's just the tram lobby, or the anti-tram lobby got lucky that night. That's all I say.
Do you think it was the beginning of the end, as they say in the literature? Beginning of the end of the tramway
Beginning of
system?
the end of the tramway started from about 1930s. People trying to get rid of it in the 1930s. It was against their interests, and they got momentum.
Same deal as in the
They
United
got
States.
momentum. Yeah, like,
with
it's no accident that they've had two oil refineries built after the trams or just before the trams were taken off, because they needed that to create a cluster.
And where were these trams built? Were they built in Queensland, Australia, or?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All the trams you'll be riding on today were actually built in Brisbane. They used to pride themselves that all the timber they used in it was harvested within 30 kilometres of Brisbane. So, and the only trams that were built over in America, we don't have any classes of those.
Whereabouts did they build them? Sorry.
Initially, they were built in local coach building.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
But as the years went by, they found it more economical to build the trams in their own workshop. They had very minor sort of workshops at Counter Street, but that just became too small, and also the lease ran out the railway land, so they had to get out. So a major workshop was built at Boomerang Street in Milton in 1927, and that maintained servicing the trams right up to 1969. It was a huge, you just got to look around here, the top equipment, the massive hammer, that all the blacksmith shop, everything that I don't think they outsourced anything, did they, Peter? They even printed their own tickets, printed their own destination signs. So it was an industry within itself. It's really remarkable what the council have actually achieved in those years.
Sad that we don't do that now, isn't it?
No, well, well, you know, everyone wants to outsource everything these days. They find it cheaper, they can get it done built overseas for a fraction of the cost.
Yeah.
After COVID, it's going to be interesting.
Yeah.
It's not happening now. Anyway.
Thank you.
Have we done that? You have to brake, Peter?
Yeah.
Okay, that's right, ladies. Just stay on board and we can go down this shortly. Unless you want to take photographs, of course.
It's been a bit of a job to pull this shed down and Can I go back? Sit this way. Do many of these ever catch fire? Like the electrical units burning?
So they've just taken
Pantograph is the right one. Although I don't think these
Maybe hold on to these.
Okay, just before Peter drives off, we're parked next to the substation. I'll just give you a quick rundown about the power that's right there. The trams are powered by DC voltage. DC voltage has never been commercially available, so the City Council had to produce its own direct current. In the early stages, the company did this by putting up powerhouses at certain strategic locations around the city. And eventually, when the City Council took over, they expanded that and had what they call substations. Now you still see a lot of these substations around. There's one at PT Terrace and a couple out at Mercury. They're designated by big BT on the side of the building, which designates Brisbane Tram. Now, the way we generate power here, power comes in those power cables over there, comes down the pole there. Now initially we used to feed it into those transformers that are covered up, and it was dropped down to 1,000 volts AC. It was then fed into the substation, and through the technology of Mercury arc rectification, you'll actually see a Mercury arc rectifier in the shop that explains you how it works. The current was diverted from alternating current to direct current. And the direct current's then fed out to line through high-speed breakers and switches to the overhead. The path of the current then goes down the trolley pole of the tram, collected by that, through the overhead switches here, down through the controllers, through the resistors under the car, through the motors, the axles, wheels, track, and the track is actually bonded to the substation, so we get the return path that way. In 2008, when we had the gap storms, a couple of the Mercury arc rectifiers were damaged, and it was decided then that that these rectifiers aren't going to last forever, so we had to look for other methods of generating power. So what came up with under a state government grant, we're actually able to put a pad-mounted transformer over there. That's a grey box you see out from the side there. And in the new substation, we've got a solid-state silicon-controlled rectifier.
So it's not Mercury anymore?
No, it's just it's a shed compared to a shoebox virtually.
Oh,
it's
okay.
All solid state, and a bit bigger than a shoebox, but that's how we get our power now. Unfortunately, because these transformers were capable of giving 1,000 volts out, and this one's only capable of 415 volts, we do have a bit of a power cut. Instead of getting 600 volts to line, now we're only getting about 585. The motorman noticed it, but you guys wouldn't. Okay.
Thank you for that. That's
Why DC over AC?
Because DC has a maximum torque on uptake, and back then the technology was all DC, thanks to what's his name?
Tesla.
Edison and
Edison,
the boys.
Tesla, yeah.
And the DC traction motors are by far a really viable device for operating electric vehicles. These days they go to the AC motors for railways and that, but that's just a change in technology. They've been able to reconfigure the way the things are wired so that they get highest torque on start by shifting and other ways of doing it.
Yep.
Okay, back in those days, the AC technology wasn't the thing.
Right. Is Melbourne AC or DC? Still DC.
Mercury in it. That brings it up. Oh, okay. You have to point it out to me in the shed where they're going to show. It's there.
11,000 volts of fencing at our houses and then the street.
It's a lovely day, isn't it? The breeze is nice. I think the other ones are a bit smoother, aren't they?
Okay, ladies and gents, that's the